Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much to be here. Great to see so many familiar faces. And I just want to start off by, again, thanking our committee, the Young Israel of Hollywood Diversity Awareness Committee. We're happy to present our second talk. I know it's been too long of a break between our first and our second talk, but we're happy we're able to make it happen. We have the great privilege tonight of hearing an old friend of mine and our rabbinic colleague, a fellow Musmach of RITZ, of YU's rabbinical school, Rabbi Isaiah Rothstein. Rabbi Rothstein serves currently as the rabbinic scholar and public affairs advisor at the Jewish Federation of North America. He's had multiple other jobs throughout his career. Lots of interesting stuff he's been involved in, including Chazon, feeding those who are less fortunate, and many other interesting things, and as well as some classic teaching jobs and working as youth director in synagogues. But Rabbi Rothstein is here not to really speak about any of that, really to speak personally. As he titled the talk, A Black Jew Talks About Diversity, Inclusion, and Racial Equity, and perhaps the subtitle most importantly, and what is the role of the Orthodox community and why should we care? So without further ado, again, thank you for everyone for being here. It's great to see a great turnout. I'll turn it over to Rabbi Rothstein. I see someone posting in, yeah, of course, Rabbi Rothstein, I can give you that, no problem. Please use the chat at the beginning if you have any questions, and Rabbi Rothstein will either read them as he goes or get to them at the end, but we definitely hope to open it up for discussion as we continue. All right, Rothstein, I made you a co-host. Tell me if that works to let you share. It does, and you're unmuted, so take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Rabbi Freiberg. Wow, Elamase B'nai Israel, the journeys of life. I mean, it's 2021. It's Chodesh Iyar, Chodesh Ziv, a month of light, a month of radiance, a month of healing. Rabbi Freiberg and I first connected, I think, back in around 2006 when I was at Lev HaTorah. And Rabbi Freiberg is an alumni of Lev HaTorah, also of RITZ. So I just want to say, first and foremost, thank you to you, Rabbi, and the rest of the Chavra at the Young Israel of Hollywood, seeing other folks who I connected with as we planned this, also seeing another Chaver Ne'aman, a close friend, Rabbi Moshe Nachbar, who's also on this call. Just it's so good to see you, Rabbi Fred, fellow colleague from Jewish Federations, but really all of you being here tonight. As Rabbi Freiberg was pointing out to me, I know there's many different programs that you engage with. So the fact that you're showing up for this, as they say, Hayom Katzar v'hamalacha meruba. There's the day is short, and there's a lot we could be doing. There's a lot of ways we could spend our time. But we came together tonight. To specifically talk about conversations around diversity, equity, inclusion, as it says in the title, racial equity. We'll define some of these terms, but also what does it mean? What does it mean to come from the Jewish community, but specifically, and that role in the broader world, the voice of Torah, the voice of Judaism, in thinking about human dignity above all else for everyone, but then specifically as Orthodox Jews. I mean, each of us, that I know that Orthodoxy is not a monolith. I grew up in Muncie. I'll tell you a little bit about my experience of growing up around Orthodox Jews. But really, what is the role of Orthodoxy? What is the role of, and when I say that, what I mean by Orthodoxy, what is the role of our Masorah, of our entire legacy as Jews over thousands of years, and how we've appreciated and have already known we're a global people? What is our role? And also having literacy, of having the tradition while also thinking about the 21st century. So as we jump in, l'chaim, thank you again. Thank you for being here. And like the rabbi shared, I would love if we used the chat just throughout. So please feel free to comment. You could comment directly to everybody or privately, whatever feels good. So yeah, I'll share a little bit about my background. From there, we will define just a few terms, even just along the way, but also specifically at the top. I'll share a little bit about the work that I do each day, but I really, more than anything, I really want to just have a conversation with you, I think it's important more than ever, coming out of Pesach, the time that we're approaching You know, I know the Ramban says that really these days of the Omer are like the Chol HaMoed of Pesach and Shavuos, you know, and we're in a time of exploring, like we're journeying. It's a time of journeying every day, right? Different madrega every day. So I hope that we could connect more than anything. So with that, in the chat, just I would love to hear from you. Feel free to put this in the chat as a comment, take a moment. But when you think of these topics of justice, when you hear these words, you know, I hope that we could get a coffee together, but I really don't know most of you. And so if you could just put it into the chat, what comes to mind for you when, you know, you see the topic of tonight's session, racial equity, what diversity, inclusion, what Black Jews, what I don't know, what hits you? Like, what are the things that come to mind? And don't be shy, put it in the chat. Like, let's hear from who's here with us tonight. You know, we only have so much time together. And I just want to know what, if it's a word, if it's an issue, take a moment to just think about that. What comes to mind when you think about justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion in the Jewish community? We'll take a pause. And if the chat is not accessible, I welcome you to unmute, but I also just want you to keep it short as possible. So feel free to unmute if the chat is not accessible. Seeing some things coming in. Thank you, Yosef, for being our nachshon. The notion of Kiddush Hashem comes to mind. Say more. Could you actually unmute for that, Yosef? What do you mean by that? If it's okay to put you on the spot. Are you okay with that? Oh, I think you're muted.
I'm Yosef Weinstock, the rabbi here in Israel, so it's nice to meet you.
Oh, shalom, shalom.
But more importantly, for our conversation, I'm Devorah Weinstock and Hannah Weinstock.
I was wondering, whoa.
So that's my claim to fame. She told me to send her best.
Yeah, Devorah Weinstock and I spent good time together in Stanford, NCSY.
Oh, okay, so, sure, that makes
New
sense.
England, NCSY.
So, you know, I think of, you know, the fact that in our tradition, God created the world, a world that's diverse, a world that endows every human being with the Tzelem Elokim. And when we live up to those, when we treat each other and the world around us in that way, we live up to the purpose of creation, what God intended when he had that divine intelligent design.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Rabbi, because like when I think about, you know, when people say like, you know, where in the Torah, like what's the source for justice? What's the source for equity? What's the source for human dignity? Either you could like point to like 1,000 different sources, or you could just say the entirety of Judaism and rabbinic Judaism is about meeting people where they're at, is about equity, is about justice, is about, right? We know that mishpatim, some say that if you just cover the Parsha Nut on the Parsha of Mishpatim, you covered like a third of Shas. You know, there's so much in there, maybe not actually, but there's so much in there to think about. So I think like when it comes to civic responsibility, engagement, Kiddush Hashem, a few other things in the chat, thank you for that these are not issues we engage with on a regular basis. And that's interesting, David. I appreciate you mentioning that, because for me, you know, as a mixed race Jew, as a Jew of color, like coming from a background where like my reality from the moment I was born was that I had multiple, you know, racial identities, or like the fact that I understood and knew from a young age that I was like a 7th or 8th generation survivor from slavery in America, you know, and that the fact that like this was just a normative thing for me. It's interesting to see like growing up in Muncie, New York, and then hearing about the last 5 years and then the last year where there's been more focus, awareness, because for us, it's been our whole lives, you know, like anyone who's just raised the way. And I think you could relate to that in probably different areas, you know, like there's other, you know, how we celebrate who we are is one piece, but also sometimes difficulties, like we know them, you know, we're close to them. So again, thank you for that, David. Rabbi Fred, Tzelem Elokim. Yeah, you know, really like the Gemara that, there's a few Gemaras on this, I think, that like kind of speak to the question, why was Adam and Chava created alone? Shalo hayu, monim, that so that people don't fight with each other, and that people don't say my ancestors are greater than your ancestors. You might have heard of this teaching. My ancestors are worse than your ancestors. And there's different teachings on that that the Gemara even provides. And I think it's just like interesting to think about Tzelem Elokim as like a value, but we use it a lot, So it's like, yeah, like Tikkun Olam, Tzelem Elokim. But like actually, like the Torah starts with Adam and Chava for a very specific reason, right? Race is not even on the table. You know what I mean? It's like not even on the table. Like that's not the framework of Judaism. Like that's a chiddush, I think. It's actually why a lot of people struggle with how we characterize Jews within this framework of identity politics and culture wars and American racial framework. Like we kind of are a glitch in the matrix a little bit, in the Jewish people in a way because of just even what Torah says. I'm seeing another line, just wanted to direct friend to the new article I just got in Tradition Journal written by Rav Michael Rosenzweig on race. My Rebbe went at YU. To be clear, it just came in the mail. So check out this tradition on this the Tradition Journal. There's a link here. Thank you, Rabbi Fred, that really just speaking to reflections on race. So friends, Chavra, we're going to dive in a second. I just wanted to get a few more thoughts from you, and then we'll enter into just I'll share more about me and why we're here tonight, or at least a few reasons maybe why we're here. So I'm seeing from Bonnie, thank you, Bonnie, wherein with the terminology is race referred to in Torah or Nach? Oh, I'm seeing it's coming from Neil. So where and with what terminology? I defer there's many other rabbis and scholars on the call, but I think there are examples in the Torah that do maybe point to tribalism, othering, but most of the conversations around skin tone and its role is more rabbinic, I would say, as a frame. Like there's a lot of different reads into Cham, when Chana was praying for children, there's conversations about what it would look like to have a child, like what child would be a wrong child, and the Gemara comments that a dark child would be a wrong child, and then with Zipporah, there's plenty of stuff to point to. But I would say largely Judaism doesn't really have a framework around race. It more has a framework around, this is my understanding, again, I would love to go deeper with you on this. It does have a framework around tribes, right? Shiftei Ka, like unity, but not uniformity. I mean, the whole book of Vayikra, we're in the midst of the Parshios of Vayikra, right, are really about the Rav Kook. He speaks about the Kav HaMechaber and the Kav HaMavdil, the need for difference, the need for separation, the need for different gradations, and the need to also see it as one moed, one mishkan, one community, one people, right? It's like holding both. We do that, we're good at that. Okay, we're going to dive in. I just want to take these last two. Increased awareness among the Orthodox community to see and understand issues people of color face in the U.S. daily. Just having these meetings and conversation is excellent. I totally agree. Just being in conversation, studying, exposure. Talmud Gadol Shemivi L'Dei Maisa, study, right? It brings us, but Ikaru Maisa, let's see what we end up with at the end of this, that we should hopefully also take action. I think we need to talk about developing a greater sensitivity within the Orthodox community to how we talk and think about people who are not us, especially including minorities. Yeah, and really, I think I just want to say again, Yasher Kochem for hosting this, because even a few years ago, unless you live it, it wasn't really on the Jewish agenda, so to speak, to think about the racial and ethnic diversity in our communities. And so the fact that we're talking about this, going back to Stephen's point, what Stephen is saying, I think it's true. I think that the fact that we're engaging in dialogue in our communities today, it's an important and critical step. But there are questions about what does it mean to be a multiracial Jewish community? And how do we create a frame for ourselves as individuals, but also as organizations, as shuls, as camps, as schools, for each of the sectors of the Jewish community? And again, to that question, what is the role of the Orthodox community? I think that there's not one answer, but I hope to speak with you about a few of them. So before we dive any further, there's a few ways to say this. I think there's a book called Start With Why. I think there's also Mechilta that says like Hakol Alecha Achar Rosh or something like that. Like with whatever your intention is going in is where it's going. And it uses a shepherd. If a shepherd goes that way, the sheep go that way. And like, what are we even talking about? So at federations, at Jewish federations, we call it JEDI, Jewish Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And it's really about inclusivity and belonging. And I want to encourage you to think about your personal why. And it's so easy to look at somebody else, but I want you to just think about you. And if it's not right now, we're not workshopping, we don't have the time for our slot today, but I would just say, for you to understand your own why and to also try to understand other people's why, I think it's powerful. Here's just like a few, okay? Just to, right? When we think about the future of American Jewry, we know we're so diverse already. The religious diversity, the political diversity, socioeconomic. I mean, I'm sure you could throw in other forms of diversity, vocational diversity, where we show up. So it's about all of us. It's a davar pasha. Really, everybody on this call, it's about all of us. And how do we build spaces like that? A second, you might say B'Tselem Elokim. You might say, other forms of Jewish and rabbinic thought on why we have a spiritual and moral obligation. You might point to data that America by the year 2044 is becoming a majority non-white society. So what that means is there's increased racial and ethnic diversity. People are meeting each other, marrying each other, adopting, immigrate. Like there's just where we are just by default, America is becoming a multiracial democracy. We are a multiracial democracy. And so there's also data on this about the year 2044. There's like a New York Times article on this. And so as America becomes more diverse, we know that the American Jewry closely follows. And acculturation, or you could call it assimilation, or, we're only becoming more racially diverse, but we also know there's other forms of diversity that we have to consider. And then also, how do we talk about this? Do we have the kalim, as they say? Do we feel comfortable? Do we kind of push it to the side? How do we speak about these issues? The more we engage in discussion, I think the more we develop comfort about how we speak about this. But it's something to keep in mind about our leadership, how we speak. And each of us are leaders. I don't know what you do for a living, but each of us have a sphere of influence. I don't know how you spend your time. Each of us have a sphere of influence at home, family. Anyone from where you're positioned. Okay, here's my reason why. One of them. Here's one of my reasons. This is my family. One of my reasons why I'm here and why this work is important to me is because it's my life. It's not only because I was raised mixed race, though. It's also because of Muncie. I don't know if you know Muncie, if you've been to Muncie, if you've heard of Muncie. Some clever, they're like, Indiana, like Muncie, like where? And, if you look to the left part of this, it's like, that's kind of how I think of Muncie when I think of Muncie. This is my family in the middle when I was a little kid. And, I was raised, in the right side where the gray heart is. That's where my house is, where I grew up. And, I joke that like Muncie is a really diverse place if you're Ashkenazi and Orthodox, because it's really true. There's like so many different kinds of Orthodox Jews in Muncie. Like, I'm not joking, like not only just from Hasidus, but like also, like from a tilt to a hat to how you pronounce something. Like it's literally you're in a different part of Europe in some parts of Muncie, and that's how I was raised. I was asked to leave my middle school because I started going to NCSY programming. I had payas until I was 10. My name is Yeshaya Yosef. People still call me Shaya. I go by Isaiah. Like when I went to, the first time I met people from the opposite gender, it was really in middle school even. And my parents, like, how they got together, like my mom She's a Giora. She joined the Jewish people about 40 years ago. Before, like, there was a term called Jew of color, or like, I mean, it's just Jewish, and then also, I guess, as being a Black Jew. And she has her own like wild story, honestly, of like how she even came to Judaism. And she's mixed race also. My mom's side of the family, they fought in the American Revolutionary War and the Civil War. They're Dutch and Irish. And my mom's father's side were from West Africa and were enslaved in America. So my mom is biracial, and I'm multiracial. I'm a quarter Black. And my father is, he was raised like conservadox, called Shuva to Chabad. He says the Rebbe changed his life, saved his life. I was raised kind of like Chabad and mixed race in Muncie. That's kind of how like we came to be who we were. And like I say, like, I'm the lightest skin of my siblings. Each of us had very different experiences. I'm the white sheep of my family, as we would say, and depending on where we were and what setting, like I'm undercover, like if you can't tell. So like I'm the undercover brother, I really am. And I'm telling you, I could tell you so many stories. I could tell you so many stories of what it was like to like be with one sibling, another sibling, how like when me and my brother Josh, who's the darkest of the three of us, like when we would be in like, I don't know, we would be in like in Yerushalayim somewhere, and I would be introducing, I remember Shana Aleph, my brother came to visit during break. I was introducing him to my friends who like didn't really know my background, but I was like, I don't know if you recall like what those dynamics are of like, the in-between years of yeshiva seminary vibe. And like, I was just introducing him to friends, and they're like, wait, what, you're brothers? Like, how are you brothers? Like, he's Black or brown and you're white. Like, are you adopted? Like, are you Ethiopian? Wait, prove it. Like, and we would just be hilarious about it. Honestly, we would do things like, we would look at it, we were like, oh my gosh, you're right, we're not the same color. Or we would take out our IDs. But honestly, if you really think about the pull of that, that's insane. That like we have to justify our existence because like people just can't get it, Like that's kind of, and the fact that we're a global Jewish people, like, what do you mean? Like, we're from all over the world. Some people say we're the first global people. You know what I mean? Like, what do you mean? But obviously, migration, how we get here, the stories, so much to unpack. I think we only have like another 35 minutes, 40 minutes. So I want to keep going, but I just think it's important things to think about. I'll tell you like 2 or 3 stories. I don't know if you've seen the Calculator Watch before. Maybe it's just me. I don't want to, sometimes when I'm with a younger audience, sometimes like the Gen Zers or the middle schoolers, they look at me and they're like, what? Like, what do you even? But the Calculator Watch, it's like the Apple Watch of the late 80s, the early 90s. Everybody wanted one. And where I went to school, to Cheder, for real, like, again, if you could picture me with Payas, I don't know if you can at this point, but I'll just say that, like, I remember the school environment that I was in. I was in 2nd grade, and a little boy, this was like probably one of the first times I realized that like my family was different. I was like 7, and a little boy, he like leaned into me during like Berkat Hamazon, during like in the lunchroom with like hundreds of little boys, and he says to me, he's like, you're not Jewish. I remember he says that, he's like, how could you be Jewish? Like, your mom's Black, you're not Jewish. And I remember that I felt like I got zapped. I was like, oh my gosh, he's right. I'm not Jewish. Like, my mom's Black. And I remember I started crying, and then the rabbi, who like knew me because I'm a Rothstein, right? I have 2 older brothers. So like, I'm round whatever for him. Like, he's like, oh. And so he took me and he brought me to the principal's office. And then the principal didn't say anything to me either. And instead he actually just handed me a calculator watch, brand new calculator watch. And he said, let's keep this between me and you. You don't have to tell your mother. Like, there's no point. And I get home and my mom sees the calculator watch, and she asks, like, where'd you get the calculator watch? And I said, oh, Rabbi so-and-so said not to tell you that a kid said you're not Jewish because you're Black, and he gave me a calculator watch. And she, like many other times, to be honest, like, this is really just one story. She's a lover. Like, her name is, I'll just show you back. Like, Her name growing up was Tanya Maria Robertson. Her Hebrew name is Shalamis Geula Rothstein. She named all three of my brothers, and according to like different things, like Yehuda Shlomo is double Malchus, and my middle brother Josh is Yeshua Mordechai, which is like double warrior. This is how she talks. Okay, my name is Yoshaya Yosef from double prophet. Her name has Geula in it. She talks about the Abishter. She wears a sheitel, the whole thing. And like, it's just so funny that there's so many different times where she kind of like managed to speak truth to power, to like remind people about sensitivities. And so she went back to the principal's office with that took away the calculator watch. I remember brought it up with her so many times. I wish she never took the watch, honestly. But putting that aside, another example was like there was a certain shir she would go to where the rabbi would use the word shvarza, and you might know the word shvarza is pretty much the N-word in Yiddish. Like, it's a derogatory term. You might say Schwartz, okay, Schwartz, okay, colors, but bottom line is when you use the word shvarza, you're not saying a color, you're saying the N-word in Yiddish. Like, that's the bottom line. And there was a rabbi who was using the word, and my mother went over to him after the shir, and the rabbi said, come on, I'm not speaking about you, Mrs. Rothstein. I'm talking about them. I'm not talking about you. Like, and she said, you're speaking Torah. Like, what are you doing? Like, how could you speak that way and speak Torah in the same sentence? Like, and he said, well, what would you do if the Lubavitch Rebbe used the word Shvarza? And my mother was like, what are you talking about? Like, the Rebbe would never use the word Shvarza. And from there, that rabbi stopped using the word, And one other like quick example. And with this, I'll just I'll pause, and I want to hear from you a little bit what comes up for you, whether it's about racial equity, and we'll define some of these terms in just a second, but or anything else that comes up. The Parsha sheets. This is not quite it, but it's Parshas Tazria, right? Tazria Metzora. Thinking about these Parshas, I don't know what a Parsha sheet would look like for you, an image of this Parsha would look like. But in Muncie, Moshe literally was a guy in a strimal, like in my Parsha sheets in second grade. And my mother would say, do you think Moshe really looked like that? And then I would be like, I don't know. And then she would say, do you think Moshe's skin color was more like my skin color or more like your skin color? I'd be like, I don't know. She's like, more like my skin color. Moshe was not from Europe. Like, I'm like, oh, okay. And so fast forwarding, here's a picture, in Muncie, we were the only mixed race family. Here's a picture. My brother's actually in the one in the middle with his mouth open like that. And then I'm in the bottom left corner. I don't know if you can spot me, but there are about I don't know if you count data. The question of who is a Jew is already bold, right? A bold question to ask. But then on top of that, like, we know counting is like, there's a fourth book of the Torah is there's example after example of what happens when you try to count people. It's like a bold move. Think about the fourth book, right? It's literally called the Book of Countings. and it doesn't really work out for pretty much anyone who tries to count anyone. With that said, when it comes to the racial and ethnic diversity of the Jewish people, like Big Gadol, like, people who are connected to Masorah, like in different denominations. I don't know, we have to talk about like all these things. The data points to anywhere from 800,000 to 1.3 million people who are identified as Black, Asian, Latinx, Native American, and for American Jewry. Now, when it comes to like how many are within Orthodox Judaism, like, it's a great question. I'll tell you that because I'm in this space, I meet all the time with Orthodox Jews of color, all the time. So there are plenty. I even co-founded an organization called Kamocha, where we have over 200 Black Jews who are engaged, including like, the ones that you've heard of, like Nissan Black and Amari Studemeyer. But guess what? There's 198 others who don't have their articles and whatever, like, and kids. We have 70 children in this, just in Kamocha, in the last 8 months, you know what I mean, who are Black Jews. And that's just Black Jews, let alone Asian Jews of color who are Orthodox. And I can even think back to being at Leva Torah. There was actually different Jews of color that were a part of my year and other years, we didn't use that term. Even the term, I don't really like it, honestly, but I'll say that for another time. Anyway, here's the work that I do. Here's the mission of the work that I do at federations. Um, we're going big. We're thinking on a generational timeline. Um, in terms of like the role of how Torah shows up, I actually think that that's one of the things that we're doing is we actually have a Jewish frame for our work to everything that we do. That's why we call it Jedi, Jewish equity, diversity, and inclusion. And we're thinking about belonging. Like, what does it mean to be a part of a moed? Right? What does it mean that the moed's in the center and that everyone has equal access and that it doesn't matter what shevet you're from or what degel you hold or who you are, or whatever it is. And like, honestly, we all know that Jewish engagement in the 21st century, like what a mess. What a freaking mess. Oh my gosh. So I just think that so much of the work is not about race, honestly. It's a piece of it. It's a piece of the puzzle, but it's mostly actually about us and how we create space for each other and how our shuls, and I really want to thank Rabbi Freiberg, the rest of the leadership team, like really like the rest of the chevra here who brought us together, because, we're living in a moment where speaking about this is like, it's like it's on the agenda, but the real question of success is like, am I talking about belonging in a year from now? Am I thinking about belonging in 5 years from now? What are the goals that I'm putting together as an organization? What are the indicators? What are the moves? What are the chess moves that I play to actually cultivate belonging for everybody, so that it's not a dread, so that I feel engaged? Whoa, Danny Aqua. Whoa. So listen, just with that, I'll pause because I now need to look at Danny Aqua and I can't get multitask. Wow, Danny and I grew up together. So, so l'chaim l'chaim, chodesh tov, and yeah, let's take the next 25 minutes. Any questions you might have? If you're feeling like you don't know how to ask the question, you want to take a minute to formulate it. If you're like, I don't want to ask it out loud, then you could write it in the chat. But you should totally unmute if you're feeling it. And then also you could private chat if you're like, I don't know how this is gonna land, and I won't say your name. So, okay. With that, I'll pause here. Okay, I'm already seeing something here. Oh, look, I haven't been paying attention. Yes, Bonnie. We don't, with JFNA, we're not punning too much with Star Wars, I'll be honest. But I do think there's some chachma there about like what it means to be a Jedi, to have a force within you, to like have the force, the forces of good versus not good, keeping intergalactic peace. I don't know, there's something there, but we don't actually. Jedi literally just mean, like for us is Rosh Tevos is an acronym for Jewish equity, diversity, and inclusion, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Do you think that Orthodox Jews of color need a unique space? I think, when I look at my like concrete goals for the work that I do, I'm focused actually on building multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-abled Jewish community. Actually siloing and segregating, I think, perpetuates issues. It even goes back to the term Jew of color. Do I have a descriptor for you? I don't know. If you identify, do I call you an Ashkenazi or European Jew every time I say you're Jewish? Like, why is there, and like the equity, by the way, long term is where people have everything they need. It's like really a synonym for tzedakah, de machzaro, like according to one's need and what they're lacking. Equality is I give everyone the same shoe size. I wear a size 12 and a half. Equality is I give you the same shoe size. Equity is I recognize that each of you have a different color, different size shoe. Same thing for glasses, right? I'm not going to give you my glasses. Like, you have your own prescription. Equity is recognizing the diverse needs. So when we think about equity in the Jewish community or in the Orthodox community, or it's that people are given what they need and that they're not treated differently, frankly, because of who they are. Like, they're able to show up and feel a sense of belonging. So that's the long-term goal. With that, Rabbi Fred, with that, like, we're not there yet. The spaces aren't conducive fully yet. Some communities are better than others. But and by the way, I know each of you could find something that your Jewish community has failed you in. I guarantee it. That's not to say that we're not holding, though. Literally, I mean, it's 21st century and we're literally still here. It's literally a miracle, you know. So like, but at the same time, I think each of us could find something that that we would say, I need to look somewhere else other than the shul, maybe, or I need to look somewhere else except for my kids' camp for them and X, or this kid's school for Y, or like, you know. And growing up in Muncie, do you know where we would hang out? I'm glad I have you know, Daddy here. Like, I don't know, just like thinking about the times that in different moments, I know we've overlapped in different spaces. But like in Muncie, like we hung out honestly in the woods, in the backyards, at gas stations. We hung out like at the 7-Eleven. We didn't really hang out with our teachers, our rabbis. When we were together in different spaces, people, you know, like we did gravitate to certain rabbis or leaders, but it's the ones who made us feel comfortable. Like, I'll just speak for myself. Like, and I didn't really hit those until I was in Israel. Honestly, Leva Torah was one of the first positive Jewish experiences of my life. And I grew up in Muncie, you know? And don't get me wrong, Kushner was great. But like, where it felt like my own, or I felt comfortable in my, so, you know, but I'm in it. I'm here because I think that we think about just how much the Jewish communal ecosystem has done to bring the Jewish people to where we are today, and the role that we'll play in the generation to come. I think there's so much work there. So anyway, that was just a rant. Thank you for that. But I hope there was some nuggets in there for you. Lily, oh, thank you. Sending that back.
Isaiah, if I could I ask one question from something
Yeah,
that
please,
you said as a comment? You mentioned about the danger of siloing. And I was just wondering how that interplays with sort of what I understand to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, sort of the need to acknowledge and validate differences. So how do those two sort of play off each other, and how do we, I guess, reconcile the, you know, embracing difference while being part of like you said, diversity on the one hand, but unity, not uniformity. So do we sometimes err in our attempts to acknowledge and validate people's differences? Does that lead to the danger of siloing that you mentioned? How do we balance that?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, on one foot, you know, as they say, I would say first you start with what brings us together, and then you start with the diversified needs of different people. So, right, the mission was built by everyone. Then Cohen, Levi, Yisrael, this person, that person. So holistically, first and foremost, what are our spaces like? And when people show up, are they leaving at least the same? Hopefully better. is you know, but sometimes, you know, and I'll say, I don't want to speak for my family members. Again, from where I am, I had a different experience because of the color of my skin, but I had a front row seat to seeing what it was like to navigate Jewish spaces as someone who doesn't present as European. And so, or, you know, or Ashkenazi, like Ashkenazi is actually, I don't like that word, or Ashkenormative. I don't know if you've heard that, because Ashkenazi, we know, if you're holding with like ritual halachic Judaism, we know that Ashkenazi is not a ethnic term as much as it's also a religious, traditional minhag halachic framework term. Like it also oversimplifies. But what it means to show up in spaces where you're the you know, where you're the person who doesn't quite fit with the frame. So Yosef, again, Rabbi, like, start holistically, what unites us, but then we do need to create diversified approaches to addressing different needs for different communities. And again, it's not just only race. But I think a good starting point is honestly social equity broadly. How do people walk into the space? Does everyone have what they need? What policies and procedures? What behaviors can you make? Like, there's certain things around organizational equity that also apply to shuls, to schools, to anything that we're building. And then from there, it's like, once you do that, you're honestly at Zion, right? You're a beacon. You're signaling to everybody that, oh, we care about how people feel when they come to our space. Everyone, that's already a huge win. It's its own madrega, honestly. Then you go deeper on different issues that honestly we need to face. We do. Es lasos Hashem, you know? Okay. So people from the community I've talked with think that being Jewish excludes being white. They argue that Jews are not white. What do you make of this line of thinking? Honestly, I try not to play into it. I also don't think it's for anyone's role to identify anyone. When you identify yourself, that's one piece. But then, guess what? We live in America. And whether or not as Jews we play by the game of race, America is built on frameworks of race. Like, I am a seventh, eighth generation survivor of slavery in America. Like Yom HaShoah was last week, Yom HaZikaron is tomorrow. Try to connect, lahavdil, again, I'm not comparing things, but I don't know if you're a second or third or fourth generation survivor of the Shoah. But when you think about kind of how we're positioned in America, there's who we are as Jews, and I think we're a global people. We're a multiracial people. We're a multi-ethnic people, a multicultural people. Just look at halacha based on what part of the world you're from, even within Europe, right? Different shitas here and there and everywhere, and how we honor that, by the way. We honor how halachic process even goes based on our diversity. But we do have something to reckon with. Because if you look at, there's a book called The Price of Whiteness, Jews, Race, and American Identity by, what's his name? Eric Goldstein. And it really just like kind of takes you through how, are Jews white? Well, nah, that's kind of the answer for like, it's a really dense read, but it's like, it's complicated. That's the answer to like, from decade to decade in America, it's to answer the question, it depends when you came to America. That's the answer to the question. And because from decade to decade, the Jewish people's status today, you might say that we're actually very much not white. There's unprecedented attacks of anti-Semitism. There's racially charged attacks and incidents caused against minority groups. The Jewish, but it's not a simple answer. The way I think about it is like, I don't know if you have a lot of chords entangled, but whiteness is also a culture. It's not just a racial category. So what does it mean to be entangled? This is like the question, right? What does it mean to be entangled with like whiteness? And in many ways, we're European Jews, but Jews are not European. We're Jews. Like we're not geographic. You know what I mean? Ki mala haaretz deya es Hashem. The whole world should be filled with that light. That's a Reb David O. Weinberg original. Kamayim layam mechasim. This idea that just how this prophecy from my namesake, that Hashem, the knowledge of Hashem should fill the world like the water covers the sea, right? It's like, so there's a lot there for us to contemplate, but I would encourage you to get a few books. There are many books there, articles. Do you find Israeli society being more inclusive? I spoke to, I'm going to try to get a little tighter with my answers. I spoke to a friend that lives in Eretz Yisrael, and he says that there's all these different kinds of Jews from all over the world. And they actually don't have the descriptor Jewish, because they're like, everyone's Jewish who lives, I don't know, maybe not in every building, but like in this building, my friend who I was talking to last week, he's like, yeah, we have someone from Brazil, there's someone from this, someone from here. And it was just like normal, like, but when you think about like what we just spoke about in racial categorization, America, Israel, there's there's things we can learn, but it's two different worlds, it's two different realities. But there's definitely lessons that you could harvest from both, but I would never compare the two. It's just a completely different framework. And there's similarities, but it's not good to compare. It's good to stay domestic with one thing and focus on the other soon. Ace, thank you. I know the representation can do a lot to help those who are marginalized feel included and welcome everywhere, and not just in religious circles. Lately, there's been a trend in Jewish children's literature to make sure there's more diversity in the visual representation. And I'll just point to racial diversity, right? Racial and ethnic diversity in the visual representation. Are there other areas you would like to see more representation of Jews of color? I don't think I appreciate the moves that are taking place around visual representation, but that's honestly just falls short a little bit. That's the truth. It's a great and important step, but it's not the end result, right? It's a step. It's still a part of the process to me. The ideal around representation is, number one, that we remember that there's already all this science and data about being in diverse groups and getting things done with diverse groups. It's better to have people who don't agree with you. It's better to be around people, right? There's all this stuff out there, social psychology, sociology, on just what it means to be diverse. But really the goal is that, to me, representation and inclusivity is when people are a part of decision-making processes, srara, so to speak, or are in positions of authority and power, so that they're able also to make decisions on behalf of their communities. It's one thing to be invited into a process, but it's another thing to be empowered to also be a part of solutions for, right? There's a line in the disabilities communities that says nothing about us without us, right? It's not just being invited in after, right? And some say it's diversity is being invited to the party, but inclusivity is being asked to dance at the party. And that's not true. It's really, inclusivity is, do you want to help us plan the party? Do you want to pick the soundtrack for the party? How do you feel when the OU embraced a racist administration? It's a challenge when our institutions reflect values that are political and do not seem to be inclusive. David, I'm not going to go there, but we can talk about it offline. And I do think that when it comes to the establishment, though, and our mainstream institutions and our roles, I work for Jewish Federations of North America. We're the largest Jewish organization in the world. We sit at the table of all the world's largest nonprofits, and I think about the establishment, mainstream institutions, our capacity and our role, and I think the OU plays a profound and very important role. I know Rabbi Howard focuses on a lot of these issues. I sit at different tables where the OU is very much civically engaged and thinking through some of these issues. And the legacy institutions versus grassroots, the 21st century, there's a lot of muscles, spiritual push-ups, reflection that the establishment needs to have. I don't want to point to any one institution. And then politics is always a thing, it's always a thing. So, but I don't think it's something for the Farhesia, as they say. I think if you want, I'm happy to have a one-on-one with you on that one.
All right, Rothstein, if I could just jump in, a lot of good questions. I want to be able to get there, but just wondering about the second line of the title. What's the role the Orthodox community can play? Especially, thinking about recent events, unfortunately, again in the news today, another member of the African American community, being killed by police. Was it an accident? Was it not an accident? Not important to talk about details, but what role do you think? We're talking we're talking about very much inside our community, and perhaps that's where we have to start. I don't know. I read the title, maybe I misread it, but what role the Orthodox community play in terms of do you think we can play a role in terms of or Lagoyim, or do we have to work on ourselves first and before we can go ahead and affect the national conversation?
Shkoyach, yeah. I think there's different theories of change that the rabbis provided for us around social change. The bein adam la'atzmo, lechavero, lamakom. You start with yourself, you go to the broader interpersonal, and then you think about lamakom, space, Hashem, the systems, And I think also, I don't know if you've heard the acronym for Melech, the Derech HaMelech, Melech being Roshei Tevos, also for Mem, which is the Moach, starting with the brain and your thoughts, Lamed for Lev, then from the mind to the heart, and then the Chaf being for Klayot or kidney, but like the physical, the actions that we take. So I do think that one of the profound roles of the Orthodox community is that if we think about the core for what allows for us to be a Jewish people that has been sustained for thousands of years, if it starts with education, like for JFNA, we say education leads to engagement, leads to empowerment, which leads to equity. So the education, the literacy, I mean, that's the most obvious. The most obvious is that most people don't even know where they're from. We're just like, we don't even know what's going on. We don't even know what's going on. And by the way, if you could quote a Rashi Tosfos, it doesn't mean you know what's going on. But what I'm trying to say is that there's something about literacy and being close to thousands of years of voices in our ears and head where we daven, again, whether you daven 3 times a day or you don't, whether you counted the Omer or you didn't, sometimes, there's something though about being culturally even raised within an Orthodox communal framework where I think we have certain awareness to what it means to be, the Jewish people. And also, I honestly think if you look through Divrei Chazal, through this lens of equity, of human rights, you'll just, and also the Torah, you'll just see it coming up over and over and over and over and over. The Gemara asks, like, why does it say 36 times in the Torah, 46 times in the Torah? Lo talchitzenu asager, right? Don't put pressure on the stranger, because you are strangers in a strange place. And then, but what's interesting about that is that, like, you see that we're constantly reminded of how much capacity we have as a people to stand up against injustice or people who are under a Paro or a Haman or an Amalek. Like, we know, and so in that way, I've done 150 programs this year. I have a full list. 20% has been with the Orthodox community. Maybe that's fair, I guess. I don't know. But I kind of feel like we should be at the front of the line. Stay in your halachic zone, but if we're in it and we're immersed, but we have the kalim, we have the language, and if you, I'm telling you, go to your next shir that has nothing to do with this. Just listen. It's everything that Judaism is. So that's what I would say is just a most obvious. The other one big thing that I think that's interesting about the Orthodox community is that the primary lens for who's an insider versus who's an outsider is halacha. And there's complications around that for, multi-faith families, LGBTQ. There is. But when we then just ask the question, who is a Jew? In Orthodoxy, that's the primary lens. Halacha is the primary lens for who's seen as a part of the community. Okay, if you keep Shabbos, you don't keep Shabbos, but who's a Jew, right? So I think actually the fact that halacha theoretically is our primary lens and race or other social identities or politics or all these other things are secondary lens, that could actually help us. I think we just got confused, though. I think, honestly, if you look at many Orthodox communities throughout the country, the primary lens is not halacha, it's community politics. So it's we have, I don't know, I don't mean to be harsh there. I love, and that's not just the Orthodox community when I say that. I think that we're all kind of navigating some stuff there. So Rabbi, I don't know if that hits some of what you were asking.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then I see there's just 2 or 3 more. But if there's other folks that want to unmute, feel free to. Danny, thank you for your question. Chabad is well known for being accepting of Jews from all religious observance levels. Do you find that inclusion extends to Jews of color? If yes, why are they successful? If no, why do you think it differs from their inclusion of those from varying religious backgrounds? Yeah, I think it's interesting. Chabad, I actually was just, I was in a program last night where Chabad came up also. And, you know, I will say that like my mother's conversion process was under modern Orthodoxy. I don't think Chabad had, I don't know exactly the history of conversion in America and within Orthodoxy, but she converted modern Orthodox because the Chabad based in, for whatever reason, was, you know, the politics of who controlled how conversion worked. To have a full Chabad based in was not in the cards. And Rabbi Kellerman, I don't know if you know the book series Permission to Believe and Receive. The president of my mom's based in was Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. Chose my mother's conversion date, Zion Adar, which is Moshe Rabbeinu's birthday and day of leaving the world. And you know, like I think the reality is though that I was born and raised in the Chabad Monsey kind of side of things, but I also went to, you know, where I went to middle school was more Litvish, and where I went to high school was modern Orthodox. And you know, I would joke that like my teenage rebellion was becoming modern Orthodox. Like NCSY was like I shaved my payas off. I started going by Isaiah, and I went and I met Rabbi Yaakov Glasser, and I learned like Esa Enai and Achenu, and I had no idea. When I got to high school, I didn't even know how Tikva. When I got to Kushner for high school, I'm not even joking. Like growing up in Muncie, I had no like nothing Tzioni in the schools that I was raised in Muncie. But Chabad, I think there's something to be said. The Rebbe was actually very big on equity, on empowering people from where they were at. He never tried plucking people out of their context. There are many Kiruv movements that kind of just like try to pull you out and throw you into yeshiva or seminary. The Rebbe was like, stay in business, serve Hashem from business, stay in your art, serve Hashem from art. Like the Rebbe was actually very big on equity. I met the Rebbe a few times actually when I was a little kid. I was at his Levaya as well. And I do think that Chabad also like in terms of gender and, you know, empowering women, is there a single group of like Orthodox Judaism that empowers women like in such an incredible way, still within halachic frame? I know there's a lot to unpack there, but I just would say like there's something there about Chabad that has a thinking and a focus. Is there racism in you know in everywhere, like, or racial bias or whatever language you want to use? Like, yeah, it's there too. But I think the Chabad philosophy for sure, especially, you know, going back to like the halachic lens, like the Chabad is on the soul lens, right? It's like tripping out on the neshama more than anything. Histalshlus, like the layers of the soul and like a skin color. What's that, you know? So I think that's kind of interesting. And then just we'll land with this one. I actually think it's a great closing note. You know, from Stephen about the book cast. You know, when we think about like, okay, so we just discussed a lot of things. Like now, what? Like okay, like what do we do and what's this about and how does it work? Like one is the ongoing conversations are critical. But there are like strategic frameworks for shuls to think about inclusivity and belonging. But then as individuals versus organizations, there's different kinds of choices that we could all make, right? What different directions we can go in. There's like you end this program and it kind of like hits you a little bit. You may bring it up with a family member. That's actually a great way to continue the conversation. There's reading a book. That's like even longer because you're like, you know, you're going on a journey with a book. There are people though, you know, there are relationships to be cultivated, not necessarily just with people who have identities that might go into the directions of what you want to learn, but like there's just people that you can discuss this with, just chevra hisvadus, as they say, you know, just to connect on, I think is powerful. But Stephen's example, I think, Stephen, like, I hope I'm saying your name right, by the way. Okay, cool. This book cast, I don't know if you've seen it, but I mean, it's definitely got its traction. It's, you know, on the front, you know, it's on the bestseller list, and, you know, you walk into a bookstore, you'll be there, and Oprah likes it. Haskama from Oprah never hurts, you know. But honestly, Stephen, I would love if you would share like how you're in it. I read it a little bit ago, so I would love to hear what you would say. But I will say it's a great entrance point into going deeper on like thinking about just hierarchical frameworks, not only around America and race, but also the Jewish people and Europe. But
Yeah.
What were you going to say here? Yeah.
So I mean, it's available at the Broward County Library. So I did not buy it at the bookshelf, the bookstore. But I just found it fascinating. She speaks in the book about the skin tone in the United States is this defining what race is. I mean, race is a human construct that Europeans came to America pre the creation of the United States, when they came and created, different colors of or tones of skin, defined what we call now today as race in America. And the caste in India is not defined by that. And Yosh also discusses the caste in Nazi Germany, which also was not defined by skin color, but obviously defined by, an Aryan or more native versus, Jews or gypsies or others that were there. But in defining the caste of a subservient caste and I think the term was a dominant caste and a subservient caste, and how, we really understand in the history of the United States of how whites really have presented themselves in this dominant role, and how many, I'll call it issues that we have presently in the United States to today are due to fears of the people in the dominant class of the lighter skin, of the white skin, feeling threatened by those who are of darker skin or come from other places, that the skin tone isn't there, since as you mentioned in your early slide, that the shift is changing in the United States for that. So, it really highlighted to me, I mean, obviously, as a light-skinned Jew / Ashkenazi Jew, the ability to kind of align within the dominant class in the United States, it's a privilege in a way to be able to do that in a way, and to realize that those who are not necessarily in this dominant caste due to the skin tone that they were born with are given a different level within our society in a way, in so many ways, whether it be education or housing or jobs or whatever it is, and those in the dominant caste feel sometimes that they are, quote, entitled to that privilege just simply due to the color of their skin, regardless of their educational levels. So I will kind of give a plug for our next event, which we're going to soon start to publicize. Someone I think Rabbi Rothstein knows well, Ambassador Fitz Haney, who is a friend of mine, who is a converted Jew, and an extremely articulate, well-educated, fantastic guy in just so many ways, and comes from a very interesting story, but he is African American, and he is Jewish, and he has faced many of these inequities based upon the caste in here, and he has emigrated to Israel, and I won't give away his whole story, but I invite everyone to come tune in next month as he hopes to share that with the group. Thank you.
No, shkayach. And I'll also, the last thing I'll just say here, and I know I'm just noticing the time, is that Stephen, what you also just modeled for us, like, is what it means to be on a learning journey. Like, you just like kind of were taking us through some of like, the Ikare cast, like some of the core pieces and frames, and it's only through just learning, engaging with content, and then you're also describing further learning from people, from books, right? There's an ongoing journey, friends. So I hope that we could continue together. I want to thank you all again for joining tonight, and hopefully more to come. So l'chaim, Chodesh, as they say. It should be a month filled with light, ER or light, but also the Ziv. I think this is actually the month that the Beis HaMikdash was inaugurated in the month of ER, and so that's also just a further reminder of just what we're all facing towards. What we're all looking towards is it's one nation under God is not just an American idea. It's what Judaism really brought into the world. So we should be blessed. See you soon. Thank you again.
Thank you, Rabbi Rothstein. Shkoyach, thanks so much. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We look forward to your feedback, your ideas. If you have any other ideas of speakers you'd like to see our committee bring, please feel free to reach out to Steve Kurtz, to Mark Ben Ezra, to myself, to Rabbi Fred, and there's other members of our committee, Mark Chandler. We'd love to hear your suggestions and look forward to having you at our next event. Keep your eyes out for the publicity for that, happening in about a month's time. Again, thank you, Rabbi Rothstein. I know this is later than you normally do your talk, so really appreciate you staying up with us and giving of your free time. And Yasher Koach for all you do. Keep up the great work.